Hello everyone and welcome to this IELTS speaking course. So for the first lesson we're going to start with the topic of linking words. Now there's a good reason for this. I believe that this will be quite important to you no matter which part of the IELTS speaking exam you're doing, because you're going to have many ideas that you need to share with the examiner, and of course you need a way to link all of these ideas together. Repetition is also not a great thing on the exam, so we're going to be looking at a variety of linking words and phrases that you can use to really try and up those band scores. So without any further ado, let's get into it and I'll share my screen with you now. Okay, so I have three categories of linking words on the screen in front of me. And these will probably be of most use to you out of the many categories of linking words. So let's go through them. We've got generalizing, we have adding information, and then we have giving contrast. Now in brackets underneath all of these, I've put, I suppose, the most common or most basic way of giving these categories. So for generalizing, you've got in general. For adding information, the simplest word is and then for giving contrast, it would be but. So as I say, whenever you're linking your ideas together, whether you're speaking or you're writing, it's very common to use these words, and of course you can use them a few times, but in the IELTS exam you want to show off your range of vocabulary and your knowledge of different linking words and phrases. So underneath these basic examples, I have given a whole variety of different examples that you can use on the speaking exam and the writing exam. So let's start with generalizing over here. Now, on the left, I have written what's called a cline. Now, that means there's an arrow going down on these words. And as you go down, you can see that the phrases become a little bit more formal. So if we're just staying with speaking, another way of saying in general would be on the whole or by and large. Usually these are adverbial phrases, so they will need a comma after them, okay? But if you're actually doing an IELTS writing, even if you're doing a speaking, to be honest, it's not too formal. You can use the phrases generally speaking or broadly speaking, okay? So instead of repeating in general or generally, maybe think about using some of these words on the exam as well, these words and phrases. Okay, moving on to adding information. Again, we have quite a few adverbials in this list. And by an adverbial, I mean something that needs to be followed with a comma. And that's why I have brackets around these words here. So if you say in addition on its own, you're going to need a comma after it. However, if you just want to continue with a determiner, so if you want to say in addition to this being something you've already said, you don't need a comma there, but you would need it after this. So in addition to this, comma, I think that, and then you continue your sentence. That's the same as well as, or as well as this. Except it must be said that as well as is not used with a comma afterwards, okay? That works in a slightly different way. So we've got a few more examples here. Besides, furthermore, moreover. Furthermore and moreover are generally interchangeable. Even if you want to say something a bit more informal, you could say, and on top of that, and then give another example. But this one is too informal for writing. Now, this is a good time to say that not all of these words, and as I've just mentioned about a couple of these examples, not all of these linking words are interchangeable. You can't just replace one with the other without changing the grammar slightly. So a good example of that is with not only, and we'll get to that in just a second. But ones like furthermore and moreover, they are interchangeable, but some of them are not. And this is also the case when giving contrast. So I've got a couple of phrases here, on one hand, on the other hand. So you give basically opposite examples. So on one hand, I think it's a very good idea, but on the other hand, there will be a few problems to take into account. Right, despite and in spite of. Now, this is a common mistake in English. Usually, students mix these two phrases together and they say despite of, but that's actually not possible in English. They do mean generally the same thing, but you have to separate them. You have to say either despite or in spite of, okay? And I've put the fact that, and we'll get to why in just a second when we look at the example below. Okay. Having said that, and in contrast, are both adverbial phrases, so you need a comma after both of them. Not with whereas. Whereas is actually a conjunction, so you do not use a comma after it. You can use a comma before it, but not after it. Then you've got a few more examples here, even though, although, and though. Now, the first two are quite similar in their use. They usually go at the beginning or the middle of a sentence. They are quite similar. Some people say even though gives more emphasis, but they are very similar in their use. Though, however, is used at the end of a sentence. So, oh yeah, everyone's coming to the party. I don't think John's coming though. Okay, and you make that exception. So that's an important word to know because you can't use but at the end of a sentence. And then another couple of adverbials, nevertheless or nonetheless, when you want to give a contrast perhaps to a point you've just made. Okay, before we move on, let's give you a couple of examples using some of these linking words that the grammar is a little bit different for. So let's start with not only. Now, not only is an adverbial, but there are a couple of ways of using it. Now, you could say the easiest way is by putting it after the subject and verb. So Cambridge is not only a good place to study, but it is also a good place to work. So I've got the comma, and then you put in the second part, but also. However, it might look a little fancier in the exams if you can actually use it with inversion. Now, this means when you put a particular adverbial at the beginning of a sentence, but then that will trigger inversion. So the subject and the verb will switch. So Cambridge is becomes is Cambridge. Okay, so not only is Cambridge a good place to study, but it is also a good place to work. And these two sentences mean the same thing. This almost looks like a question, but it's very important to say it is not. It is just triggered by putting this particular adverbial at the beginning of a sentence. Okay? Now, before we finish this section, let's give an example of despite. So let's look at the first one. The football match continued despite the bad weather. Okay? So here, despite is followed by a noun phrase. The noun is weather, and then we qualify it with the adjective bad. And we give that contrast there. However, if you want to use despite with ing or even he, you have to change it a little bit. Now, for ing, actually, you can keep it the same for ing. You can follow the word despite with the word being. So he was allowed into class despite being 20 minutes late. Okay, you wouldn't say despite he, you can just use the ing form. But if you do want to use the word he, you need a couple of extra words. So he was allowed into the class despite the fact that he was 20 minutes late. Then you can use a subject like I, you, he, she afterwards when you've got these three words. Okay, everyone, and that's all from me for this video. If you're working on my website, you can now scroll down to do another linking word exercise for yourself. And in the final task of this lesson, you will get the opportunity to record an IELTS speaking part 2 for yourselves, which I will then listen to and provide my own feedback directly. If you haven't bought this course, then please consider doing so, and I look forward to seeing you all in another video very soon.